Jim, Montreal Airport Authority serves approximately 40 million passengers annually. Now, although these numbers may not be that high, over the past years you've been market leading in your commitment to adopting self-service technology. Just walk us through some of these industry firsts and basically what's currently available on airport.
Well, what we did very early in the game was we realized that the self-service phenomenon was going to be real. A lot of people were going to be checking in online, checking in at the airport, but not using the conventional methods. So we actually started to adopt and adapt our facilities to accommodate that. So we were among the first to use common use check-ins, for example. We didn't want to have every airline having its own kiosks growing like trees throughout our terminals, so we said, no, this is not a sensible way to go. Let's get ahead of this and let's go common use. So let's, as much of this technology as possible, we will control and allow the airlines to use it, have their front end on our technology. So that was one of the first things we did, and it's paid off in spades. And it's developed a very good relationship with the airlines as well, because that allowed them to trust us in developing these technologies, and we've extended it to other things. The systems behind the counters, self-baggage check-in for customers. So we've started adapting a lot of those sort of technologies, and we see a day coming very, very quickly where that whole front end of the process is going to be entirely common use. And in fact, the airlines are very comfortable with that. There are certain airports in the world that I've seen, and we'd like to start adapting the same sort of technologies at the gates. Just passing, we're testing some of this technology now, just reading a boarding card and letting people through a turnstile into the gate area. So I think there's more and more that can be done. But I think working closely with the airlines is going to allow us to do that to our mutual benefit.
Well, your investment has clearly been validated by virtue you've managed to achieve a 95% approval rating from the passenger research that you've conducted on the self-service kiosks.
Well, as I mentioned, I think the next phase is going to be at the gate itself. I think that's the next level is going to be, do we need agents checking IDs, and do we need agents checking boarding cards? Is that not something that can be done automatically somehow? And I think there's tests going on with that already, and I think that's going to be the next extension of this. I think, in all honesty, I think we're not far from the day where the first airline employee that you're going to encounter at the airport is going to be on the bridge of the airplane.
Over the next 4 years, you've allowed a budget of something approximating $1 billion in capex for infrastructure improvements. What do these precisely entail?
Well, the single biggest part of that actually is a major extension to our international departure facility. We have 11 international gates today, and we're adding 6 more, plus another gate that deals with remote processing for buses and PTV, transporter vehicles. By far, over the last couple of years, the international sector has been growing far faster than the rest. And I think it reflects the community in Montreal as well. It's a community that has a very high attractivity to outside tourist organizations and business organizations. And as well, the people in Montreal have a very sort of international flair and like to travel internationally. So September 2016, in fact, we will have inaugurated and in service 6 additional gates, which gives us, we think, plenty of capacity to take us out to the 2025-2030 timeframe. Of the amounts that you talked about, that's the single biggest element of that. So the changes on the tarmac, extending the tarmac, extending the maneuver area, and the building of that probably accounts for nearly half of that expenditure. In addition, there's a great deal of money that's going into in the next couple of years, and we'll be inaugurating this year a whole reconfiguration of the old terminal, the internal part of the whole old terminal for the treatment of international passengers. Again, reflecting the fact that that's where the growth has been. We're investing a great deal of money and effort into reconfiguring the terminal to provide for additional retail and restaurant space, because even though we feel good about the numbers that we're generating, we really believe that we're punching under our weight in terms of what we should be generating in terms of non-aeronautical revenue. By North American standards, we're well beyond the typical. In fact, when I look at it, we're in the top 5 in terms of retail, and I think we're number 2 in terms of restaurant spend per passenger in North America. So we're clearly among the best in North America. but I would consider that
But it lacks in comparison against Europe and
It's
Asia.
a weak peer group, quite frankly. I much prefer to look at the European airports as a model. And I think our traffic composition resembles more a European traffic model as well, because we have only 40% of our traffic is domestic. So 60% of our traffic is going to or coming from an international or at least a non-domestic destination.
So would you be targeting something more, approximating more 40 to 50% for non-oriental?
I've always said that I'd really like to see 50%. Now that may be ambitious, but I think over time we can achieve that. But I've made it very clear to the folks in our organization that I'd like to see that into the 35% in the next 5 to 6 years.
You're one of the first airport authorities to sell carbon credits. What have been your learnings thus far?
Well, in fact, the most important learning that is that this is good economics as well. Not only is it an excellent move from an environmental point of view, but the steps that we went into to generating those carbon credits have been good economically. You got to look at what the source of those has been. When we embarked on this, we essentially doubled the surface area of our airport when we embarked on this process back 12 years ago now. And we've reduced by half the cost per square foot of, our overall cost rather, of energy.
That's extraordinary.
Well, it is, but when you thought about it, this terminal was built in the 60s, the original terminal, and when we looked at it, we said, there's so many opportunities in simple things like insulation, like the lighting systems, the heating and cooling systems, to put the controllers in, to maximize, to put blinds in that maximize the utilization of the sunlight and minimize the heat of the sun. So all those sorts of things combined have allowed us to do some very interesting things. So I said the cost per square meter of our energy cost is actually 1/4 of what it was when we started on this process. So that allowed us to generate all sorts of savings. So not only is it good from an environmental point of view, it's great economics. So we put in special systems in the heating that captured the effluent from our heating systems and regenerated that heat and used it in the buildings. We did all kinds of innovative things, and they required investment. But the paybacks were very, very quick.
I want to get back to something you alluded to earlier in terms of passenger processing, and one of the barriers that are encountered right now is the amount of time it takes to go through security.
Yes.
Where do you think that can move to in order to create still further operational efficiency within the airport?
Well, I think we all think there's going to be ultimately some technological change that's going to allow us to make this process much easier for passengers. And I think we all dream of the day where we walk through a corridor and technology takes over and somehow analyzes the people as they're walking through this corridor. There's a lot of work being done on Checkpoint of the Future to come up with this. I think that's probably a reasonable expectation in 10 years from now. But I don't think we can wait that long. So I think in the interim, we have to start thinking differently about the security processes, and particularly about the population that is going through. There's been some great savings generated by governments and by airports in looking at stratifying the population from an immigration and customs point of view. They look at the population and they say, we know there are certain people that have subjected themselves to some sort of pre-clearance, so we don't have to treat them the same way we have to treat the general population. We have a certain amount of information about them that gives us an advantage. It allows us to take a calculated risk. I think that same sort of thinking has to be applied to security. I recognize in North America particularly, it's not politically correct to subject everybody to exactly the same process. People get up in arms and they say, well, if I have to be subjected to it, everybody has to be subjected to exactly the same process. But I don't think that's realistic. I don't think people all represent exactly the same risk. And I honestly believe there's a great benefit to be gained by stratifying the population, pre-qualifying certain people to get a different process or to be streamed quicker because they don't represent the same risk as somebody for whom you have no knowledge.
Could that be sort of alluded to as being potentially positive discrimination?
Well, it is. I prefer to call it stratifying. I prefer not to call it discrimination because I don't think it's discriminating. But what it is doing is saying, listen, it is realistically looking at a population and saying the premise that everybody in that population represents exactly the same risk is wrong. There are people for example, and I'll use myself as an example, I run an airport. I have had to have been vetted. They've done all sorts of security and background checks on me in order to have that role. And I can, at any point in time, I can walk through any door in that airport. But if I buy a ticket, I then become subjected to the same process as everybody else. Does that make logical sense? You know, do I change my character? Do I suddenly become a security risk just because I bought a plane ticket? So somebody with the background check that I've gone through should be able to be subjected to a different or a lesser process. I'm not calling that discrimination. I'm saying it makes sense. Similarly, there may be other people, other populations, that may be able to have the same sort of treatment, whether it's police officers or people in the military, for example. If they've been subjected to the right level of security that everybody could be satisfied with, then I think a case could be made that those people should be subjected to a different, lighter process and streamed much quicker. It would then allow the security authorities to take their precious resources and apply them best where they're most needed, to deal with a population they don't know anything about, or that they have to vet. So I don't see it as discrimination. I see it as efficiency.
I'll stand corrected. Maybe a positive streaming is a better use. One last question, Jim. I guess it's not quite crystal balling, but in an ideal world, where would you like to see the airport in 10 years' time?
One of my focuses is going to be, how do we make that whole passenger experience, really from the time they leave downtown or the time they leave the airport and head downtown, how do we take all that stress out of this? And that's something that I see I want to focus my attention on, and the people in Montreal want to focus their attention on. How do we take all that anxiety out of it? And if we're able to do that, I would say we've been successful.
A worthy objective, Jim, on which to end. Many thanks for your time.
My pleasure.